I would like for us to begin with a partnership with act.tv. They had coverage of Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, as they begin to launch a campaign for lower drug prices, lower pharmaceutical prices, and exploring why it is there's so much profit in an industry that is draining so much from people who need their medicine. It's a matter of life and death, quite literally. Here's a first clip from our partners at act.tv of Elizabeth Warren discussing this campaign.
The average American spends more than $1,300 a year on prescription drugs, more than the citizens of any other developed nation in the world. And in fact, Americans pay nearly 4 times more on average for drugs than similar countries. 1 in 4 Americans struggles to afford their prescriptions, and 3 out of 10 adults did not take medications as prescribed last year due to the cost. That is shameful. No one should have to choose between affording a life-saving medication and putting food on the table or a roof over their head. Meanwhile, the drug companies do everything they can to keep prices high. They abuse our patent system to create an impenetrable shield around their drugs, which allows the drug companies to extend their monopolies for years and years after patents on the original invention expires. They use the same tricks to prevent generics and biosimilars from entering the market, dramatically limiting competition. And without competition, drug companies take advantage of their monopolies to set egregiously high prices, all while regulators just look the other way. In fact, more than 100 drugs saw price increases higher than inflation during 2021. Now, that's not because of any economic factors. It's because we've given drug companies free rein to engage in rampant price gouging right on the backs of consumers. And this has worked out great for drug companies. Drug companies are continuing to rake in record profits. Pfizer expects to pull in, I hope everybody's sitting down, expects to pull in an eye-popping $100 billion in revenues in 2022. And out of that revenue, they expect to make over $20 billion.
That was footage again from our partners at act.tv. They launched, streamed this new campaign that is being launched by Social Security Works and Elizabeth Warren. We'll have a lot more information on that campaign as they continue it. But the conversation, Pastor Galloway, is so pertinent. I recall members of my dad's church who stopped taking their medicine their prescription because of the exorbitant prices, and making that decision at a certain point means accepting death. Like I've known people who literally stopped taking their medicine because it was so expensive, and then they died. I'm sure this is something that replicates itself across the country.
You know, it's funny. I remember a couple of church trips that were sacred growing up in my church community. It's only now, I'm now years old that I realized that those trips were not actually leisure trips. They were medical tourism. They were going to places where some of the medication that they had would be much, much cheaper. I was just in Panama doing some a mixture of family leisure and some humanitarian work, and I'm sitting there looking at a sign as we're testing to get back into the country, and there's a sign in there that right next to the sign that said, "You want a dental plan? Check out our dental plan that starts at $12.95 a year." And then I'm sitting there and I'm talking to some other folks, and there are folks from the United States that are in Panama to not just receive their care, but to they figure for the price that I would pay in the United States, I might as well take a trip in some sunshine and get my medication for cheap. So you know, I'm and then to learn how much Latin America benefits from medical tourism as a function of the tourism that comes into the area, in particular in Panama. Wow. So I'm absolutely aware of this. The second point that comes to mind is the fact that as we do this, I have a very, very interesting tension in that for me, having a market-based health system in and of itself, or one that's driven by those seeking profit, is very non-Christian. And so I have a very specific moral problem with that piece as well. And one of the points that Senator Warren makes, right, there's a profitability to keeping prices high. So you can't even have a market system for those who believe in the market system space. You can't even use that to drive something that's more accessible to people. And you can't make patents or find other ways to do this. I'm now starting to think of I might need to install some of these trips in my own church so that some of my folks can get their medications.
Wow.
And Pastor, and if we look at the other side of it, what the pharmaceutical companies will tell us, which is, to some degree very real, that there's there's a tremendous cost in trying to develop these drugs. And for every drug that finally gets through FDA, finally gets through the 3 trials of testing, there is a serious cost to that. And for that, I think we all agree. However, there comes a point when that drug that you made and the cost that you incurred to make it, you have recouped that cost.
That's right.
And so now, Pastor Galloway, to your point of when folks in that profession, there's a medical oath that you take, and you should not, under any circumstances, now place a person in a position, as the quote that Victor Hugo just said, if you place a soul into darkness, sins shall be committed. So in the case of that quote, that's what we're talking about. You had some people who said, yes, I need to take my medicine, but I can no longer afford it. So now they pull away from it. And so there comes a point with the pharmaceutical companies when you want to try to explain to us the amount of drugs that fail and your cost that went into all of those failures, and now you have to recoup your costs. There comes a point where we understand that, and we know that you have recouped that cost. But we also understand the other side of it is that you're now beholden to shareholders. You're now beholden to profits. You're now beholden to this capitalistic society in which there is one word to explain what it is that you are doing. And that word is greed. Greed to the point that you don't care. You no longer care about why you first wanted to create this drug to try to, quote unquote, help people. Now, that help means you absolutely want to gouge people because, as the senator said, $100 billion. And from that, 20 billion of that, I'm assuming that the last part of her statement was going to be the amount of profit that came out of that.
Right.
So even though they can explain to us the cost that goes into it, there comes a point after so many years that drug has been on the market, you have recouped your costs over and over and over again. That is clearly what it comes down to, just price gouging.